several of his reports, there were 3 reports, went to the 6th committee for discussion. No draft articles had been prepared at that time. The response of the states was a cautious one. They underlined the need for a cautious approach on this topic and stress the importance of approaching the topics from the lex lata perspective, from the perspective of the position as the law exists. And the special rapporteur's conclusion was that immunity was the established principle in customary law, and any exceptions thereto must be proved. That was the basic approach. And a number of states emphasized the fact that the Commission should keep clearly in mind the distinction between the task of codifying the lex lata and making proposals for the progressive development of the law, the lege ferenda. Given the practical importance of the Commission's work to member states, they urged that the Commission maintain that distinction clearly throughout the work. The ultimate objective is that these draft articles must be acceptable to states. The International Law Commission is serving the member states of the United Nations. So therefore, that this distinction must be clearly kept in mind throughout the work of the Commission on this very complex and sensitive topic. And I believe this should and will continue to guide the work of the Commission. I now come to the importance of the work accomplished by the current Special Rapporteur, Madam Escobar Hernandez. And under her stewardship, we see the emergence of several draft articles, most importantly, clarifying the scope of the topic, which was referred to by Sir Michael Wood, and also a discussion, also an effort made to identify the normative content of the notions of immunity ratione personae and immunity ratione materiae as a frame of reference for the future consideration of this topic and to establish the legal regime applicable to each one of them, immunity ratione personae and immunity ratione materiae. There are the 2 definitions which have been provided in the draft articles of immunity ratione personae, with emphasis on the function of representing the state or the representational character for persons to enjoy immunity ratione personae. The definition of immunity ratione materiae covering official acts, acts which certain officials perform in the discharge of their mandate, described as official acts, which is to be defined at a future point of time. I would now turn to the dilemma confronting the Commission, although it appears to have been settled, with regard to the scope of persons entitled to immunity ratione personae. Reference was made by the previous panelists to the Troika, a concept recognized by the International Court of Justice in the arrest warrant case, namely the absolute immunity in respect of all acts performed by heads of state, heads of government, and ministers of foreign affairs. And I believe there are cogent reasons for including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I will explain why. There had been some voices of dissent by 2 very eminent members who I count among my close friends in the Commission. But I think we need to understand why is the Foreign Minister included within the Troika. I'll just refer to the Special Rapporteur's comments in the report, explaining the underlying rationale for inclusion of the Troika within the category of persons enjoying immunity ratione personae. And I quote The basis for the view that immunity is enjoyed by the head of state, head of government, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs is the fact that their functions include the representing the state in international relations, a function that is based on international law and performed automatically without the need for any express authorization by the state that they represent. It is a representational function which international law attributes to these officers independent of a state's domestic law, the sole function of which is to establish a homogeneous hierarchical model for representation of the state within the international community as a whole, and which promotes and facilitates the maintenance of international relations. It is precisely this automatic representational nature based on international law which explains the status that is granted to these state officials within the framework of international law as a whole. For example, in treaty law and the law of international responsibility, unquote. I think that encapsulates the underlying rationale as to why these three categories, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, should enjoy absolute immunity. This representational character, it represents, as was mentioned by the Special Rapporteur, a homogeneous model in the conduct of international relations. We all know that under the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, the Minister of Foreign Affairs can commit his state by virtue of a treaty without the requirement of full powers, because the Minister of Foreign Affairs, as the intermediary between the state and the international community, is deemed in international law to carry the standing authority of his head of state and the head of government. So I think we have to take into account this reality, and I'm glad that the Commission as a whole is proceeding on that basis, that customary international law recognizes the Troika as being entitled to immunity in respect of all states, immunity ratione personae. Then the other side of the coin, should this go beyond the Troika? And we have two, on either side, two supporters of that view. This was discussed in the Commission even from the time this was first introduced. The problem, of course, on the one hand, is that I think the Special Rapporteur identifies the difficulty or the impossibility of proceeding on a list approach, of finalizing an exhaustive list of quote unquote other officials outside the Troika who should be accorded immunity ratione personae in respect of all acts. But on the other hand, as was very correctly mentioned, today the whole nature of conduct of international relations has seen a fundamental change. It has moved away from the ministries of foreign affairs, and as correctly observed, in a post-WTO world, the Minister of Trade, the Minister of Commerce engage in international affairs with other states, as important as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. A Minister of Defense, for instance, will be required to travel on behalf of the state. And if the immunity of the Minister of Defense is denied, and if a foreign court is to exercise jurisdiction, as Sir Michael Wood said, we are not talking of international criminal jurisdiction by courts and tribunals. We are talking of domestic courts of foreign countries attempting to exert jurisdiction over a visiting dignitary. The result is instability of international relations. Okay. Now, how do we address this? We cannot proceed from a practical point of view on a list basis. At the same time, there are persons other than ministers of foreign affairs who are vitally engaged in the conduct of international affairs. The initial approach of the Law Commission, certainly at the time that I served on the Commission, was to